Great. We are recording. Okay. So, yeah, I am so excited to get a chance to speak with you, Reb Brian, today. Should I try to spotlight us one more time and see if that works? Spotlight you.
Sure, yeah. The way it works for me was when I spotlight more than one person, it makes both of their faces big, but
Yeah.
I don't know if other people are seeing it that way.
Yeah. How's everybody seeing it out there? Are you just seeing me in large screen?
I'm just seeing Brian.
Okay. Yeah, we could do, yeah, you can select your view to gallery view, and I think I'll just put us on speaker, and that way I'll just go back and forth depending on who's actually talking, and hopefully I won't get too excited and talk over on top of you, Brian. Great.
Well, that should work fine, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, thank you so much for taking some time to be with me today. I'm excited. I haven't really done very many of these interviews or conversations for the Havara yet, but this year it was just an inspiration that I had. I'm so blessed to have so many incredible, wise teachers and friends, and wanted to cross-pollinate a little bit and hear what you're up to. And you have joined us here in Ashland at the Havara a few different cycles around with joining us to provide music and prayer leadership when Reb Zalman came to be with us for some Shabbats. So we're familiar with you up here, but since then, your work and your community has grown so much, and then you've written a new book. So I'm really excited to catch up with you and to have Torah of Awakening community members who I'm excited to see here today, and Havara community members coming together to learn with you and to just listen to a little conversation. And I want to invite everybody, as we're talking today, if Reb Brian brings something up that sparks a question for you, jot it down or type it into the chat, and I'm going to leave some time toward the end of our talk together to bring some of your questions to Reb Brian. So yeah, feel free to just type those into the chat or write them down and type them as we get to that part of our conversation. So Reb Brian, you have been teaching and practicing Jewish meditation for over 20 years, maybe your whole life in some way. You're a spiritual leader. You're a composer of sacred music with a smicha from Reb Zalman. And then you went on to found your own practice and learning community, Torah of Awakening. And now you've also just released a new book, Kabbalah for Beginners. And there's just so much wonderful energy emanating from the fountain of you. I remember about 15 years ago leading a meditation group with you in the evening. And I had just finished reading Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. And I was really sparked by his articulation of the concept of presence. And then that night you were giving a teaching in the meditation group, and you were speaking about presence as well, only you were connecting it in such an incredible and beautiful way to the Torah reading of that week. And I felt like, I remember like similar to listening to Eckhart's work, little fireworks were, ricocheting throughout my spiritual self, my cognitive self. And I realized that you were doing something really unique at that time, which was synthesizing this concept or idea of presence. And now I think you're calling it the path of presence, is one of the phrases that I like that you use, with Jewish teachings and the history of our tradition. And the word presence, I love words, being a poet. I can't help, I was thinking today, like we use the word presence in so many different ways. We say, I would request your presence, We use it as a verb, like don't presence that idea in this conversation. We can be present. We can present something. Anyway, my mind was just thinking about this word and how it's such a central part of what your, from what I understand, from your way of imagining the most powerful modality. And I just wondered if you would talk a little bit about presence and what is that presence and why is it important to be on a path of presence?
Yeah, that word, I think, did enter into popular spiritual culture through Eckhart Tolle. Um, but it was used in a Jewish context also by Martin Buber in the early 20th century. So it's really it's an interesting word to me too, because until I heard of Eckhart Tolle, it didn't occur to me to use that word to talk about the practice of being present, or bringing, I don't think I was even saying being present. I think I was just talking about bringing awareness into connection with the present moment or with the content of what's actually happening in the present moment, things like that. Um, Things that are very much emphasized in Zen. In fact, Zen is really, I think, of all the paths that I've ever heard of, Zen is the most purely presence-based spiritual path. Although it also, as far as I know, does not use even a Japanese equivalent of the word presence. Um, my Buddhist friends tell me that Buddhism does not have an equivalent word for presence, which is interesting too. But there was a sentence that Martin Buber used in one of his addresses, and I read it in a book that was at Rabbi Bert Jacobson's house. So I don't have the book, and I don't remember the name of the book, but I really want to get it because it's got. And I don't know if I need to read the whole book, but it's just the first sentence. It would be great to know exactly which address it came from. But this is what he said. He said, I want to ask the question, can there be a religion of presence? Not of remembrance or of hope, but of presence. And when I read that sentence, I think it was I was at Rabbi Bert's house, I think in maybe 2000, maybe 1999 even, or 98 or 2000, something like that. And I was sitting with him. We used to meet and just have talks, and we still do sometimes. And when I read that, it just really struck me like, wow, Buber was doing exactly what was just starting to kind of take formation in me and what I wanted to teach about, because it's central for me and for what was transformative for me. And it's also possible that Buber used some German word that I don't know that was translated by someone as presence. But anyway, Eckhart Tolle also talked about in his first book, the Power of Now. He gives there's a whole passage in there about encountering a tree and being present with a tree, which is almost exactly taken out of Martin Buber's book I Am Now. He does the same passage almost in there. So there's some connection in there. I don't know exactly how all those things got transmitted, but of course in Jewish tradition, straight ahead Jew, of course Martin Buber is a little bit considered on the fringes, but there are many words in Torah that also get translated as presence, a few different words, like the kavod Hashem, for example. And the word kavod can mean honor, but it can also mean, and it's also often translated as the divine presence, the kavod Hashem. And Shekhinah, which comes from shochen, which means to dwell, that's also, I've never seen it translated any other way other than the divine presence. So it's a very, very rich word. And it's also, I think, usefully ambiguous.
Right.
Sometimes we want words to be really precise, but
yes.
I heard a rabbi say recently that it was a teaching that I came across. It might have been, I can't remember. Maybe it'll come to me. But anyway, I heard a rabbi talking about how the Torah is purposefully imprecise, and that normally we think things should be precise so that we can really understand it. But when you're writing something that can communicate to people on different levels, both the seasoned practitioner and just the person who is maybe just beginning or is only going to really ever interface with it in a very cursory kind of way, then it has to be ambiguous enough to be able to relate so that the mind can make the connections. Each person makes their own connections and applies it in the way that they understand. And I think the word presence has that evocative sense to it as well. So.
That's so beautiful. When you speak about the path of presence, it seems like it's so beautiful for one to think of presence being a path, that there's both a sense of motion and direction and complete stillness at the same time, kind of implied in that phrase. And so for you, for your understanding, like, if you were going to invite me or a student onto the path of presence, what are you what does that mean, the path of presence?
Well, so the subtitle of the whole thing is The Jewish Path of Presence. And the idea behind that is to use Jewish practices and teachings in order to help us, both to support us in being present moment to moment with whatever we're doing, and also to enrich, if that's a word. There's a richness to presence, but there's also, presence itself is totally simple. It's just consciousness meeting the moment. And to me, that has to do with the word in Hebrew, tam, which means simplicity. And actually, there's a verse in the Torah that says, something. I think the verse is Tihyeh tamim b'Hashem Elohecha, or something like that. It means to be simple or be straightforward. Simple, not in the stupid sense, but to be uncomplicated in your approach to connecting with Hashem. And then Rashi comments on there, receive what happens with simplicity, which was quoted in the beginning of one of the Coen brother movies.
Right.
That's actually how I learned about it originally, because it was such a strange Rashi quote. You don't hear Rashi saying Zen, so
even though his name sounds kind of Zen.
Right.
Roshi.
Exactly. I searched for that quote, and I eventually found that it was a commentary on that verse in the Torah. It's one of my favorite little things, because he's saying that to connect with the divine is really the same thing as, or is another dimension of, connecting with what is, which of course is so central to the understanding of the divine, as not as a being, but as being itself, as the underlying reality of everything. And so it all kind of comes together when we approach the Jewish practices, which are all encompassing. You can do Jewish practices all day long. We have the tefillot for morning and afternoon and evening. We have the blessings that are said before eating, and all kinds of other events, during the day. There's prayers for before you go to bed. There's the mitzvot of the talis and the tefillin and the Shabbat. There's so many. Judaism is such a rich tradition. You'll never be finished exploring the actual practices. But the tendency with that is that it can become very cluttered. You feel like you're running, and there's a stereotype in Judaism, of like what's the joke? It's like I think like a priest and a Zen monk and a rabbi went up into the space shuttle, and so they were circling.
Oh, right.
You know this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
And so they come back down. and they're going around the earth, like faster than the earth is normally turning. So they're seeing the sunrise, every few hours. And so they asked the Zen monk, so what was this experience like? And he said, well, it's just a confirmation, of the unity of things, and to see the beauty of the entire earth as one whole. You could really see it as a whole thing. And he asked the priest, well, what was it like for you? And he said, oh, well, I was just filled with divine love in my heart to see all of humanity together, this universal vision. He asked the rabbi, how was it for you? He says, ugh, it was such a pain in the tochis. What do you mean? Shachris, mincha, mariv, shachris, mincha, mariv, over and over again.
Right. There's no shortage, right, of portals of points of connection that we're invited to in this tradition. That's for sure. Yeah, I love that invitation, what you're saying to the being in a state of presence is receiving what is present as God and not separate from God. This is God showing up right now, and we are meeting that. That reminds me that, you, in my opinion, you happen to be one of the most illuminating kind of deep sea divers of the Chumash, especially, first 5 books and our cycle of readings every year. I look forward, each week to reading what you've pulled out of the Parsha and how you've managed to connect a story that I've read, 30, 40 times over the cycle of years, how you managed to pull something from the story that causes an aha for me quite often. And I'm sure, that keen eye that you have for how the sort of like the language of our Torah, being a translator of this, thousands of years old oral history that became a written history. You really have a penetration to see into the white fire, as they say, between the letters, but even into the letters themselves, into the etymology of the words, and bring forth teachings that really illuminate what you were just talking about, how we meet God. For example, the Parsha that is happening this week, you write about in your book, when you're talking about the Sephirah of Tiferet, which, as we know, is the kind of the center, the heart center on the tree of life. And you talk about Tiferet, and you talk about how the patriarchs of the tradition passed down from Abraham as Chesed, Isaac as Gevurah, and then coming to Yaakov, and specifically his meeting with Esau, which is about to happen this week, as this moment where Yaakov really becomes Tiferet, and there is a real manifestation of Tiferet. I have another question about that, but would you talk about that? I feel like Tiferet is in my understanding, it's the only Sphira that is connected to every other Sphira on the whole tree. It has its own connection to all other points. And I feel like this is a very important center, energy center, kind of in our times that we're experiencing right now in our culture and our world. How do we have a harmony of all the different points? And so interesting. Would you speak a little bit about Yaakov and Tiferet and just that idea of moving into Tiferet from these opposing sides of Chesed and Gevurah?
Well, in general, the Sphirot have been written about in different ways. So it's not like they mean only one thing, but they're multi-layered. And so at different times, different meanings will pop out to me more, than other times. And the meaning that's popped out to me lately about Tiferet is that it has to do with a sensitivity to to what's talked about in Kohelet and Ecclesiastes, where it says a time for war, a time for peace, a time to live, a time, and so on. The understanding that there are appropriate things for the moment, that we can do, and that there are ways that, and that the application of chokhmah, the application of wisdom into daily life, means how to know what to inject into the moment that's going to be most useful, most beautiful, which is Tiferet is beauty and its balance. And it has to do with, as you said, those other spheres, like how to balance them. When is it appropriate to be stern, and when is it appropriate to be open-hearted and kind, and so on. And so that's the quality or the skill, I think, that is so good and useful to develop if we can develop it. And
I
of course,
feel like we're
yeah,
like in a Tiferet training ground right now,
yeah, exactly. Well, that's why I bring it up, because now more than ever that I can remember, it just seems so like such the important question. It's not about what's really true or
Right.
what's really right, because that's not going to get you anywhere with opposing points of view. But how to speak, what's the tone, what's the entry point, what's the seed you want to plant, these kinds of things. And of course the enemy of that, or the main blockage of doing that, is arrogance on one side, or maybe just triggered reactive emotions. Also, like both of those things can block our access to the inner wisdom of how to respond to the moment. So so I see the story of Yaakov in this week's parsha, of him really becoming humbled, him really getting his ego kind of shaved away,
Definitely.
because he's in real danger. He's in real mortal danger. And so he is very conciliatory, and he tries to send his brother gifts, and
Right.
but he also takes precautions. That's more of a Gevurah kind of thing. So he's like the chesed, the sending the gifts, the taking precautions, Gevurah. He's also praying and just asking for mercy, which is really more like Hod. And through doing that, then he becomes Yisrael, somehow the embodiment of divinity being channeled, which we could think of as Tiferet, as the sun, the light of the sun shining into the earth. So it's a nice. All of those stories are so rich.
Incredible. Yeah, I love that idea. And even like the Netzach of Yaakov being like, he had to push forward and go to meet Esau. He had to carry through and get there, and how, such an incredible metaphor. And then I think you go on at the end of that chapter, when you're kind of just listing through the different sephirot, the different points on the tree of life. You're talking about the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, and you say, the map is the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life. The tree shows us the qualities that we need to cultivate, and the tools are the means by which we do the cultivation. And then the list, the qualities are will, intention, which is keter, creativity, chokhmah, focused thinking, bina, loving kindness, chesed, self-restraint, Gevurah, and then you use the word presence for Tiferet. And that's kind of why it struck me, just as a point of conversation, that I thought it was, I know you said different words pop out at different times, but it struck me quite beautifully that you found the word presence for Tiferet, which often is beauty or harmony or, synthesis. But to say that that is actually the place of presence, that really resonated with me, especially as a mother of a 10-year-old now, but going through the process of parenting a young child. I have found myself, swinging between Hesed and Gevurah a lot, but feeling like the most present place that I can get to is that center heart presence of Tiferet. And so it just struck me that you lit on that word. Would you just speak quickly about that, how Tiferet and presence are synonymous in some way?
Yeah, because I guess the word presence can be used as the fuel or the background to all of them in a way. But at the same time, if we're talking about really being responsive to the moment, then we have to be really connected to the moment, connected to the energy of the moment. So we have to be, sensitive in a certain way, but not sensitive to the degree that we get injured by them. Like it's sensitive, but also letting go of what's happening so that we can, and all those things are, I think, most strongly qualities of what I would call presence, ways of describing presence.
Hmm. Beautiful.
And
Yeah.
so I just wanted to say on presence, just to follow up on the silly joke, the Shachrit Mincha Mariv joke, that is that part of the part of the task of bringing presence into Judaism is, I think, is corrective a little bit. Like it's
Hmm.
both revealing the richness and usefulness of Jewish practice to cultivate presence, and also hopefully to some degree participating in some kind of tikkun in the culture where the practices can be seen that way. Because I think as all traditions have, there's a certain pathology that's a tendency because of our history, and I'm sure a lot of trauma and so on. There's that kind of reactive
Hmm.
energy that we often find that takes a lot of work for some of us to overcome. But
Yeah.
at least we should use the practices in a way that's useful to help with that, rather than reinforce it. And I know more than one person who was very observant and orthodox who had to leave that world completely because it just reinforced their own neuroses and OCD and so on. They just couldn't do it anymore, which I understand. Um, but part of it is like, how is it transmitted and how is it taught? How is it contextualized in the culture? So
Amen. I'm so incredibly grateful for that tikkun, or the movement toward that tikkun in our tradition. I know for me it has been a big tikkun to learn alongside of you through the lens that you bring, to opening up the practices. It seems like, as Reb Zalman calls what we're going through now, the fourth turning of Hasidism. It seems like there is this kind of a wave that I hope there's a lot more openness to entering the practices that way, where in other moments they maybe have been a more reactivity or more of a shield against what that experience of presence really might be within our tradition. So thank you for bringing that forward. I think that's especially available. I know that Hasidism was, as you say in your book and talk about in your book, such a connector to the Kabbalistic wave that was kind of ready to reemerge and give access to divine connection to all who hungered for it, and not just sequestered into, elite societies or secret texts or texts that only the highly literate could understand. And so your book is called, this new book is called Kabbalah for Beginners. And I think you were actually, if I understand correctly, you were asked to write a book about that. It wasn't your choice necessarily to choose to dive into that subject. And yet what you're saying about the tikkun, it seems to me, is like, it's kind of it is Kabbalistic in a sense. And so it's a gift for you to bring forward your illumination of those branches of what we sometimes call like the mystical element of Judaism, or the more spacious element of Judaism. And yet the word Kabbalah is such a, kind of a word of pop culture in the last 20 years for sure. I know that it means literally receiving or to receive. But I thought I would ask you to just take a second and talk about that word and how you approached it, both in the context of creating a book that has that in its title, but also just in, your own teachings. I think you call some of what you do integral Kabbalah. So just talk a little bit about that word and that whole approach to our tradition.
yeah, okay. Well, there's a few different levels there. I do think that Kabbalah has become a popular word, which has come to mean something that's a spiritual path and is not a typical religious kind of path. And that's came about mostly through the emergence of the Kabbalah Center, which is based on the works of Yehuda Ashlag, who was a rabbi that was a very different kind of Kabbalist in the early to mid 20th century, and he really believed that it should be universal. He was from a Hasidic lineage. He was by no means like some sort of universalist person in his lifestyle. He was very much a very Orthodox Jewish person. But because of that, I think, I want to be sensitive to how words are heard by others as opposed to what they really mean. Meaning like, by scholars or within the tradition and so on. So I didn't use the word Kabbalah for many, many years. And the reason was because for me, it brought up too much in association with the pop world of Kabbalah that was brought about by Kabbalah Center, and the world that I was really working in, which is Jewish renewal, of course, is very connected to Kabbalah, but it doesn't use that as a central term very much. It just draws on it as the background wisdom together, and mostly through the lens of Hasidism in a modern context. But when the company Rockridge Press asked me to write a book on Kabbalah, the first thing I thought was, okay, great, I'll do this. I'm happy to do it. But I wasn't that excited about it because I thought they just wanted me to write a book that was like the history of Kabbalah and just kind of give a beginner's guide to, the basic ideas and so on. But as I started to write it, I realized that it could be written in such a way that would do two things, or three things really. The first thing is it would do what they wanted it to do, which is that it does give a history of Kabbalah and the basic ideas and the personalities and so on. But number two, I wanted to set it in the context of Judaism and Jewish spirituality as opposed to present it as something separate from that. And in doing so, give the reader a way into the practical side of it. Like, how do you begin applying this in a practice that you can do, or many practices that you can do daily? And because those already exist, Kabbalah was never, it was never something separate. It was a way of tapping into the inner dimension of Judaism, the mitzvot and the Torah and so on. And so that's what I wanted to do, number two. And then number three, I wanted to bring out this dimension of presence as central. And that I didn't know if they were going to go for it or not, because otherwise you wouldn't call it Kabbalah for beginners. You'd call it, the Kabbalistic Guide to Presence, or the beginner, something like that, which I suggested to them. But they said maybe, like they didn't give me any answer on the title at first, but they said, go ahead and write it the way you want. And so I started writing it, and if every little piece I wrote, I had to send in and get their approval. And every time I sent it in, they said, looks great to us, so I was very happy that they let me write that. I'm very pleased with it. I would only change the title if I had the power to do that, which I don't, because it was commissioned by this company, so they have control over it. But I think it's a pretty good introduction both to Kabbalah and also to Judaism. Like someone who wanted to take a beginner course on Judaism, I think it would be pretty good for that, generally speaking. And also trying to really anchor it in the dimension of presence as the central theme that goes throughout.
Yeah, you did such a beautiful job. I learned a lot. It's funny, like I have definitely, studied the history and all these characters many times, and yet it's funny how the centuries kind of slip around, and you're like, was Joseph Caro, and so I really enjoyed both that piece of the book, and then, like you said, the ability to synthesize kind of your approach to presence and path of presence with the historical piece and the practical piece. One piece that I wanted to ask you about was one section of the book. You talk about the observance of holy days, and you say the observance of holy days as days that take us across a threshold into sacred time and allow the blossoming of presence. That this is one of the portals kind of practicing a Kabbalah in one's life. And that really struck a chord with me as well, because I feel like until, 20 plus years ago, I started to do the cycle of observances of holy days. I had no idea really what was in store in that practice, that it would be that each one would be such a unique portal, every year a little bit different, just like the Torah readings, into my inner dimensions, my communal dimensions, my transcendent relationship with Hashem, all these dimensions you get to visit as we step into that beautiful threshold of sacred time. And Judaism really has this idea of sacred time. Probably, we really held on to that after our sacred place didn't survive all the millennia that, it got destroyed. But sacred time became really a powerful thing for us. And I was just wondering, as I asked myself this question, I was like, I can't come up with an answer, so I don't know if you will, but I was wondering if there are any particular sacred time observances or, particular holidays, holy day rituals that you feel are really important at this moment. And, we're all kind of experiencing such a unique moment culturally and historically. And it's testing our netsock to the extreme that we can endure and push through. So what are these, sacred times that you feel like we could really draw on within our tradition to nourish us as we go forward?
Oh, well, that's an easy one. Shabbos. I think Jewish people who are not in the Orthodox context, that there tends to be for them, for anyone who is spiritually inclined, but not in that Orthodox world, there can be this block of like, oh, I can't really do that fully because I'm not Orthodox. And while there might be certain aspects of it you don't ever want to take on, the core of it is so powerful and so useful, and so transformative. I always try in any way I can, without hopefully sounding preachy or judging or anything, to try to just invite people as much as I can to experience Shabbat, because, every day, I think for most people, every day is just a barrage, it's just a barrage of what's going on in the world on so many different levels, it's just like, what happened today,
Right.
Like that show that's I don't know, Trevor Noah, who says, what the hell happened this week? Yeah, like more than, it's always like that, but more than ever now. And to really shut off all your devices so that your mind is not living outside of your immediate experience for 25 hours, to really shut down and shut down the devices, but open
Right.
your senses and open up your spirit, meaning really, really be sensitive and connected to the reality of being. And as opposed to having your consciousness taken up with all of this activity, which isn't even in your immediate experience, like activity that's coming in mostly. Some of us, of course, do experience it in our immediate experience too, with people being ill from COVID or whatever, like demonstrations and fires and riot. Sometimes it comes to us, of course, too, but a lot of it, and then of course you have to deal with it. But when it's coming to us just through the media, and we're running around trying to maintain and endure and take care of and manage life, to give yourself just a break for those 25 hours, you deserve it.
What
Everybody would feel that they deserve it, that they could, and I think there's also a fear that maybe you'll just be bored and lonely, or, like without the stimulation, maybe it'll feel kind of morose or something. But that's why, and that's part of, not the only why, but that's part of why Shabbat is not just a don't do. It's not just about not working, not reading the news or seeing the device or whatever. It's not just about not doing, but it's about doing beautiful things, having beautiful meals, lighting the candles, singing, doing some learning. All the activities of Shabbat are really to nourish the spirit. So however that works for you, I think there's such a pull and such a temptation to be constantly absorbed, and really to have our minds just conditioned by that so much. So yeah, Shabbat is the Jewish gift to the world. Doesn't have to be a Jewish thing. Anyone can do it, really.
Yes.
You may have to learn how to go oi oi oi. I don't know if everyone can do that, but you might have to.
Well, that's where Torah of Awakening comes in, right? You're teaching Oi 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 101, right? We're all signing up.
Well, there's a good number of participants who are not Jewish.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have certain resonance with certain traditions. That everything has its own flavor. Someone wrote on somewhere on Facebook, I was writing about presence, and someone wrote, there's nothing Jewish about presence. It's not a denominational thing. It's totally universal. It's open to everyone. And my response was, yes, that's totally true. But the tradition through which you enter it gives it a certain flavor and richness that's unique. And the example I like to give for that is with food. All the different foods have the same nutrients, but sushi and a burrito are really different.
That's right, cumin and wasabi.
Yeah. Break it down to the molecular level, it's not that different.
That's a beautiful analogy. I love that.
Right. So the spiritual nutrients are universal, but we have individual makeups, and so we have, just as we are individual beings, we also have collective characters, and the collective character of Jewish spirituality is something special that's not right for everybody, but for the people for whom it is right, we should at least be able to access it, easily, and to be able to connect with its core, not have to chew through so much packaging,
Right, or not even be let in the door in the first place for whatever reason. Right. Yeah. Well, thanks for opening that door. Tell me a little bit about Torah of Awakening in that context. I know when you moved to Tucson in 2016, Torah of Awakening went from, a community that had kind of blossomed under your Monday night meditation community that you led for many years, and then went online. You were kind of a pioneer in my eyes of somebody who was willing to kind of reach out beyond your geographical space and time to offer Torah of Awakening on a broader way. And then that really happened when you, I think, came to Tucson. And at first, it was, I think, if I remember, it was one meditation session a week. And we learned the Naseh, Lecha, and all of these ways of entering into our meditation space together. But now, tell me what's going on. Are you meditating every day? Your community is growing, I know, and I'm sure all of us being at home, you might have more than ever now. Tell me what Torah of Awakening is offering these days.
So beginning with shortly after the whole COVID thing started, so I think in March, there were no more live gatherings. And so we began meeting online, and we began meeting pretty much every day. So not everything happens every day, but there's something pretty much every day except for Shabbat and the Hagim that are restricted, have those restrictive practices of not being on computers and so on. But yeah, pretty much every day. And I found that, I just kind of dove into it, but I find that it's really an interesting and different kind of thing, because it's really similar in a certain way to having everybody in one room. And that's very different from what I was doing, because what I was doing was having a few people in one room and then live streaming it. So the people who were watching the live stream couldn't really interact. They could post later on Facebook or whatever, but there wasn't much interaction in terms of everybody connecting and seeing each other and so on. And so, and the other thing was that when I would refer to texts and do teaching or learning on certain texts, I would just say it verbally and talk about it. But now with Zoom, I can put the text up on the screen, and
I noticed that.
So it has more of a class quality, I think, to it. It has that dimension of learning content a little bit more than what it was, which was more about just reflecting briefly on the text, but really just about cultivating presence and meditating. So it has different quality. And then I decided to really just develop that more with the learning cycle that started after Rosh Hashanah, and make this whole year devoted to a particular learning. And so I'm doing something that I've wanted to do for many years, which is really like a basic course on Jewish spirituality or applied spirituality, and I call it Living Presence. And so every week we learn about a particular practice or a mitzvah, and we reflect on the Torah portion, and we reflect on one of what I call the 32 paths, which are the 10 sefirot and 22 letters. And it's happening through the whole year. So it's a lot of fun. I'm having fun with it, and posting the texts for everybody. And a good part of it is during the week is, in terms of my work, is writing the teachings out so that people have it in that form as well as the video form. And I'm excited about it. Another thing that I just recently decided to start is to do a once a month meditation, really in response to people feeling isolated and having various inner distress because of this COVID time.
Yeah.
So it's going to be on the second Monday night of the month, and it'll be 6 p.m. Pacific time. And it'll just be public, so it won't be part of the membership. So anybody can join in. So that the first one will be not this coming Monday, but the Monday after. It'll be during Hanukkah.
The Monday of Hanukkah. And is that a meditation group, and you'll give some teaching as well?
Yeah, well, the teaching will be more brief, because normally do an hour with about a half hour of teaching and then a half hour of chanting and meditation. This will be just a 40-minute session. And the teaching will be just a few minutes to kind of enter into the words of the Hebrew chant that we'll be doing, and then guided meditation, and then a period of silence. And
Nice.
Nice. Helping people to connect with, our own inner spaciousness that's inherent in our consciousness, and to experience some relief and some healing that way.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I find that meditation practice during the times when I feel most isolated right now, it really does relax that feeling, and I feel the vastness of connectivity that really exists just by that process of going inside. So wonderful that you're making more space and time for people to join in that experience and find some peace and some connectedness within and with each other through the community. That's really a great gift. Great. And people can find you at torahofawakening.org, which is in the chat.
You know what? Actually, it's .com.
Oh, torahofawakening.com. I bet it'll go there either way. I bet there's no other Torah of Awakening out there.
It might. Although it might go to some old defunct webpage or something.
That's true. torahofawakening.com. to find out more about what's being offered in Reb Brian Yosef's world. And yeah, so just kind of coming to the end of our hour together, and I'm wondering if anyone that's with us, thank you for putting that in there, Brian. I'm wondering if anyone that's with us has a question about what Reb Brian has been speaking about tonight, or his book, or anything that's popped into your mind as you have listened, contemplating the Jewish path of presence, or your own experience with that. Let's see if I can see everybody. Hi, everybody. I was just looking at Brian for so long, but now I see you all. Any questions? Comments? Dedications? Great. Well, if anything pops up, just throw it in there, and I'll just finish up with a last question that I have for you, Brian. So one of the quotes that you have on the back of your book that I've been talking a lot about with my son Jonah is this idea that God is not a being. I think this is such a really important thing for a child to hear, because the inheritance of our culture is so anthropomorphic and really brings this idea of God down, to use a kind of current reality that's coming around this time of year, as kind of a Santa Claus figure. And especially those two myths tend to get a little bit conflated, that there's somebody that sees and knows and it looks a little bit like Santa Claus. Fortunately, I don't think my son inherited that too much. Maybe this generation will slough off a little bit of that. But for me, that idea is very liberating. And then you bring that back to say, God is not a being, but being itself. And so I've been talking to Jonah about that, and how, every moment that we're in is actually God speaking to us. And this is a really, it kind of goes to that Gamze Latova, this too is for the good idea. This is like a really hard idea for us to feel and really sense when we're in a period of constriction, of wrestling, as we're talking about with this week's Torah portion. When we're in that kind of gritty place in ourselves, interpersonally with others, it's hard to feel that what beingness is, as it's meeting us, is actually, God doing a process with us that is just God trying to express itself. So I wondered if you would just speak to that a little bit, and what are some practices that we can use to remind ourselves of that, knowing that what is beingness is God, even when it feels a little crunchy or a little, it's hard to connect to that. What are some practices that you use that bring you back to that connection with the crunchy moment as God itself?
Well, I think that psychologically we tend to view all of our past experiences and our anticipation of future experiences through the lens of whatever we're experiencing in the moment. So it'd be interesting if you could actually have a picture over time, like a graph, and really see like moments that you felt joyful, moments that you felt peaceful, moments that you felt anxious, had anxiety, whatever, and really see it. Because
that'd be amazing.
I've never done that. I don't think that we in general, meaning human beings, have an accurate view of that at all. Because when things are good, we tend to think we generally feel good. We just assume it. Of course we can remember specific things if we try to, but there's a general sense that things are good. And then when things are bad, we tend to think, it's this again, like it's always bad, this kind of thing. So there's a tendency to view things through the lens of what we're experiencing in the moment. And so because of that, the real key is to frequently immerse in the deepest conscious, most present state that you can bring yourself to. So that's what regular practice is all about. And in Judaism, there's standard ways to do that. It's the morning, the afternoon, the evening before you go to bed, even when you first wake up in the morning. There are tefillot for all those times. So whether you do all of the tefillot or just a couple of them or even none of them, but you just use those times as moments to become present again, to connect with the various midot, meaning like all of the sefirot are particular portals into presence. So for example, like the sphere of chesed, which is loving kindness, you can become present through loving kindness, even if you're not interacting with anyone, simply by giving your awareness from the heart, like being aware of what's here as an act of love, just as you would give your attention to someone that you love. That's a dimension.
That Tiferet place again.
Yeah, and to ferret, I would think of that as a kind of radiance of being aware of your awareness as a radiant field that's beyond the body, and has that quality of light of just radiating outward, which is why we use in meditation practices sometimes we visualize light radiating outward. It's very helpful because that's a visualization of something that's actually present already, but that it's hard to grasp. But when we give it a visualization, it's easier to hone in on it. So all the Sefirot are like that. So, when we do the daily meditations, when we gather on Zoom to do the daily meditations, each week we'll be focusing on some particular aspect of that. And by doing that, and by regular practice, immersing yourself on these different levels of the intellectual level of just thinking about the teachings, spending time with them, as opposed to just learning them and saying, okay, I got it. Well, no, you don't got it. The next moment something happens, you don't got it. So you have to immerse yourself in them again and again and until it becomes more and more part of you. And of course, it's not like there's an end point to that. You get better and better at it. And then there's the heart level of, and this comes to the idea that you were talking about with God as a being or as being itself, is that it's good to understand this more esoteric understanding of God as existence or being, and that's actually what the divine name means in Hebrew. Right. That kind of helps us to get out of a lot of the cognitive dissonance that thinking about God as a person creates. It doesn't really make sense if you really think about it. Nevertheless, it's very helpful to think about it that way when you're trying to relate to God from the heart. Right. So, just as they call it in Indian spirituality, they call it bhakti yoga, where you imagine, but they're a little more clear about, or at least some of the branches of that are clear that the idea of God as a deity is something we're visualizing just for the sake of bringing forth that heartfulness. It's not taken literally. And it's the same kind of thing. We should always understand that we're not reifying it or holding on to God as a concept, as a person, very in a literal way, but we're just bringing it up in order to relate from the heart.
And then I think to relate from the body also in a way, right? It's like if God has a body and I have a body, then like there's some kind of a way we want to relate to that, the heart and the physicality or something of that dimension.
Yeah, and of course, when you get more into the symbolism of Kabbalah, then the whole Eitz Chaim, the whole tree of life, is representative of a human figure, and which is the microcosm of the divine figure. So all of that meaning and immersing ourselves in all that, if done in the right way, meaning with presence and not overly grasping onto ideas or over intellectualizing, it can be very helpful.
Definitely. I love that you brought up oh, sorry, what was that?
Oh, just helpful we'll be prepared for life then. Because, I don't think it's not so helpful to say, well, what tool am I going to use when I get in a stressful situation? No, the tool is how you prepare before you get to the stressful situation through your practice and learning.
Yes, amen. Yeah. And there's no substitute for the practice, right? And the kind of spaciousness that that allows us to have in those moments. Lately, for me, the moment has been the pushing of bedtime later and later, and just kind of watching, you know, there's smooth patches in life and parenthood, and then, you know, crunchier times, and just having the practice in the background of witnessing one's own reactions and seeing them as, you know, a piece of what is, but not being completely consumed and physically moved by them. Like, that spaciousness is such a gift. And I love that you pointed us to the Eye Asher Eye, the Yud He Vav He, the verb cognate that is God's name in our tradition, that the beingness, to me, that is kind of a little secret decoder ring, for that premise that you're saying of God being itself. And what a gift to highlight that for us and to illuminate that for us through this book.
Wow.
I want to thank you so much, Reb Brian, for giving us this hour tonight and talking to us about Jewish meditation, the path of presence, integral Kabbalah, and your new book, Kabbalah for Beginners, or even not beginners. Like, I feel like this is so rich. I'll probably read it a few more times and begin again and begin again. Thank you.
Estelle Frankel, I thought, it was the nicest compliment when she wrote me after reading it. And she said, you know, to be honest with you, I really didn't think the world needed another book on Kabbalah. But after reading it, it really did something different. And so I was very happy when she said that, because that's what I was hoping for. So, Baruch
Yeah,
Hashem.
I add my voice to that chorus and have read many of the iterations of, as you have, I'm sure, of the, you know, generations that came before, giving us their own consolidations of this idea, and to have one arising from you and in this time is such a gift. So thank you. And thanks for talking with us. And thanks to all the Torah of Awakening members who are here with us tonight, and the Havara Shir Chadash members, and to anyone who's catching this later. Thanks for listening, and do reach out to Reb Brian at TorahofAwakening.com and connect with the many, many offerings that you'll find there. I didn't even scratch the surface of our main connection, Brian, which is through doing sacred music together, but yet there is a whole another branch of Torah of Awakening and Brian's gifts, which is to listen to and enjoy some of the sacred music he's created. So do go and check out his offerings there. And I hope we do this again. This was really fun. Write more books and have more opportunities to talk Torah with you and to share wisdom and time with you.
Thank you so much, Mora Cerise. And it was a great excuse to hang out with you and with everybody here. And Beth is asking how to watch it later. Is it going to be posted somewhere, or?
Yeah, I have recorded it, and so you could just send me or Ayala at the Havara an email, and I'll share it. I'll share it with you. I didn't live stream it to Facebook, so it won't be there. But just shoot us a quick email, and we'll get you the recording, the link to the recording. Thank you. Toda rabah to everyone. Be well and be safe, and enjoy the season of lights, and sharing that as we're able to. My blessings for a beautiful winter season and a happy Hanukkah. And much love, Reb Brian. We'll do this again soon.
Yay! Hanukkah Sameach.
Bye. Thanks, B.
Yeah. I think Beth is asking what email she should send.